So I would love to invite you back up here on stage, and you too, John, please. Yes. So if you want to answer his questions, and then we open the floor for general questions and responses. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. They were very thought-provoking comments, and you clearly invite me to move the argument to a less abstract plane. And what I do in the rest of the book, particularly in the last chapter, I have a chapter on the justice of exemptions from the law on religious ground. So I just take two things. So I could go on and on. I just said to make two points. First one, I completely agree with you that compromise is never good enough when identities or beliefs or what I call integrity protecting commitments are at stake, right? And when you think about what that implies, it really means that everybody should do a bit of political theory, because as soon as you don't meet halfway, as you say, because we know that meeting halfway is usually not the right way of going about these things, then we have to identify principles for limiting the rights of some and granting the rights to others. So if you have a controversy such as whether a bed and breakfast owner can discriminate on grounds of his Christian beliefs against a same-sex couple, you can't compromise on that. Either they have a right to discriminate or they don't have a right to discriminate. Likewise, whether Jehovah's Witnesses' parents can deny blood transfusions to their children. This literally can be a matter of life and death. It's also a matter of religious integrity, where you can't have a compromise on many of these issues. So that's absolutely right. In terms of exemptions, I do worry that much of I don't know enough about the Norwegian situation to be able to pass a judgment on this, but I know a bit about France in particular, and I do find it odd that people get really, really obsessed about something which for me is a non-issue, which is the wearing of religious dress and sign, which to me, as I suggested, however briefly in the talk, I mean, a practice doesn't harm the right, it doesn't affect the right of others. To me, doesn't even get started as a controversial issue. So more interesting, I think, more interesting are cases of when is it right to exempt some from the burden of general laws. Right? So what is interesting is not whether a ban on, say, religious dress is ever legitimate. I don't think it is. But whether it is okay to enforce a general uniform requirement that incidentally burdens religious dress. So I think that's a more interesting question. So what I do in the chapter is to identify the practices that pro tanto merit protection. I call them integrity protecting practices. And then I have two general principles, which I hope can be helpful in certain controversies. And I think they're quite different. They've not been identified clearly enough in the literature so far. The first one is the idea of, so just the question I'm trying to answer is in which case should we allow an exemption to someone who is religiously burdened, an exemption from a general law that is justified, right? So I'm not interested in bans. I'm interested really in incidental burden, not direct burdens. So in which case should some of us get an exemption that others don't? That's the question. That's a tricky question about equality. Right, so that's an interesting question, much more than banning, which never strikes me as sensible. So I think there are two cases in which sometimes some of us can be exempted. Like I can be exempted and not you, for example. So the two cases are the following. One of them is disproportionate burden, and the second one is majority bias. I'll give you an example just to give you a sense of what I have in mind. Disproportionate burden is a case of a law. It's justified. We have reasons to have it, but it's disproportionately burdened a group of citizens for no particular reason. A good example of this is some Orthodox Jews believe that post-mortem autopsies is a desecration of the body, right? And in some U.S. states, post-mortem autopsies is automatic, even in case of non-suspicious death, right? That strikes me as a case where We have a good reason to have the law, but probably don't have a good reason to force it on Orthodox Jews, given that they have so strong objections to it, and exempting them from the law doesn't otherwise hamper the objectives of the law. So that would be the first case. The second case, perhaps more interesting in a European context, is the case of majority bias. So here's the case where you have a law and you think it's neutral, you know, the law applies to all of us, but when you look again, I think actually that law incidentally advantages the majority. Think of the Christian calendar, right? So in a European society, Sunday is a day off for most of us. Now, if you're a Christian, it's really easy for you to be both a good employee or a good student and to be a good Christian. It's very easy for you to go to church and to go to work. Right? But if you're a Muslim or a Jew in that society, it's going to be much harder because on Friday or Saturdays, where you should be at the mosque or the synagogue, you're supposed to be at work. To me, that's a case of majority bias. So again, there's a good reason for having a shared day of rest, right? But I can go on about why there are good reasons for that, but there are good reasons. But then if we are going to have Sunday as a shared day of rest, we should accommodate those whose religious day of rest is not Sunday. So exemptions would be legitimate in those cases. I can go on and on, so I'm going to stop here. Otherwise, I'm going to start, yeah.
So are there questions? For either of the two? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes, we need a microphone.
You probably started to answer this, but you have the standard answer to this criticism, which I found very attractive, but I think your discussion was very lucid and interesting. But is your extension, is your answer an extension to this classical answer, or is there a revision? Do we have to backtrack and look at some of the some of the egalitarian liberalism and some of the premises of that again and revise that? I mean, is it a revision project or an extension project?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It is an extension project. So I don't revise many of the fundamental premises of liberal theory, which is that we live in politically organized societies. They have to be democratic. They are constrained by human rights or versions of personal rights, basic rights. They apply to all, regardless of their affiliations, etc. So there's a division between the public and the private. There has to be, I'm saying it's a contestable one. It's not as easy as liberals think it is, but I think there has to be one. So it is an extension in that sense. So I try to, of course, the critical religion theorists want to go much further. So they tend to take a root and branch criticism of religion, right? So they might look at my theory, they're going to say, well, it's the same old thing, right? And they probably have a point. But what I've tried to do is to disentangle their critique of religion from their critique of liberalism as a whole. So I want to continue to defend liberalism, but I think they make some pertinent points in relation to the treatment of religion. So I'm trying to sort that bit out, but without challenging the foundations of the liberal political theory. Yeah. Thank you.
More questions? Yes.
Thank you. So now you've given a lot of examples about mainly religious minorities.
Yes. Yes.
But I guess, especially since you're in Norway, it's also interesting to hear about what you think about majority religion, and especially because part of your talk was about, qualifying this idea of liberal neutrality. Yeah. So if you sort of say, actually, even in the ideal theory of liberalism, we can't really talk about neutralism. Some people would hear that as saying that it's okay for the state to have a religion. So is that what it means? And if not, what do you think your sort of modified liberalism implies for the kind of majority establishment of religion that we have in Norway and many places else in Europe?
Great, thank you. So the paradigm of liberal political thought is very much the United States of America and the First Amendment that prevents the establishment of religion. Right? So liberal neutralists take it as a universally acceptable and accepted fact that a liberal state can't have an established church. Right? And this is quite problematic from a European perspective, where the state church settlements are much more diverse. And so what I tried to show is that, I mean, you know the chapter where I do that, but what I tried to show is that, again, I try to move away from simply the slogan of saying non-establishment infringes on neutrality, or religious establishment infringes on liberal neutrality. I want to look at what is it about what religious establishments actually do that is worrying from the perspective of liberal citizenship. So in which particular cases, when I live in a state that has an established church, if I'm not a member of that church, does it mean that I'm a second-class citizen just by virtue of not being a member of that church? And I think this is the kind of question one has to ask, instead of simply assuming that establishment in itself is incompatible with liberalism.
We have room for one more. No. Then I would like to thank you for an excellent lecture. Thank you very much. And thank you for an excellent response. Yes. Jeg har noen små beskjeder til dere som skal være med på det interne SAMKUL-programseminaret nå etterpå. Til de som har bestilt hotellrom, så altså de hotellrommene på Thon Hotell Vika Atrium, og dere finner det ved å gå ut til høyre, og så rett over gata. Og de av dere som skal være med da på det interne programseminaret, så begynner det 6:00, og det her, i det auditoriet som her. Og så vil jeg da til slutt takke alle sammen som kom. Jeg veldig glad for at dere fant veien hit i dag. Takk for innlegg, og for spørsmål og for kommentarer. Vel heim alle sammen.